We had a few technical and physical difficulties, which we have since resolved. We were asking the question. Well, Kris asked me the question: what is history? No, he asked me the question.
What is esoteric?
What is why? No, he asked.
What?
Oh, geez, now I've forgotten it completely. Oh, yeah. Can we forget stuff? And the answer is yes. So if the archives destroys it by accident or something, and it has happened, or the archives doesn't get to it in time, or lava covers it over, or but we have certain ways of going around this. We have redundancy. There's that seed bank in the Arctic, which keeps everything, all the seeds that we find in nature. So if we lose a plant, we can reseed it, which is
the one that Bill Gates owns.
Does he own that? Well,
yeah.
Man aside, it's a worthy venture.
Well, maybe there's more than one.
It might be, but if a server with all the data to a very critical study just poops the bed and just the power goes out, or the building collapses around it and the server just gets smushed.
This sort of harkens back to our preserving interactivity video where we discussed your thesis.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point that out for a quick shout out.
Yeah, sorry, I had to sneeze there, but I didn't.
I figured I'd fill the air.
This is painful. Okay, so now this goes into the obvious question to all this is, what does it matter? Which is really what you got to answer with any piece of writing or any argument. The so what question, which brings me to another quote that people might remember, which is history's bunk, which is Henry Ford famously said that early 20th century when asked about what he thinks about history. He's like, history's bunk. Now, he was probably saying that in a fit of contrarianism or just because he was annoyed by the questioning, but it was remembered, and a lot of people took exception to it. Specifically, my grade 9 or 10 history teacher who quoted this to me and was like, "It's not bunk, I swear." And then, he's trying to teach a group of 13, 14, 15-year-olds to that Canadian history is worth learning, which is it's
Why did he say that? Like, what prompted it? Do you know?
He just kind of started with it.
I don't know where somebody would get that insane idea.
Well, I think he had heard it in a class before. It's like, history's stupid, and he remembered it from things, so he wanted to make it interesting. And he did a pretty good job for a rural teacher. And he had an uphill battle too, because teenagers famously don't care about things. I don't really need to get into that. If you don't understand that, I'm sorry. So, and this goes into the, let the past die idea, because history's all made up. Why even learn it if it's all made up? And you get these, there are people actively working against history out there because it doesn't suit their political needs, because it's uncomfortable, because it triggered them or whatever. History is ghastly.
Let's say we were to, just for the purposes of this channel and the discussion, if we were to make the best possible argument for history as bunk, what would that be? What would that look like?
Well, there's some pretty good ones out there. I'd say a good one would be it's all interpretation, and thus every time you look at history, you're going to be looking at it differently. It's going to say something different, which to me is obvious. That's why you go back to a poem and read it more times, so you can get a new interpretation of it, because every time you read a good poem, something new comes out of it. And it's the same with history. You get something new out of it. You learn something, but I don't need to learn anything. I have the skills that I have, and that's all I need, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, well, cool. But you're missing out.
So hubris, basically, ego and hubris.
Yeah, from our perspective, it's ego and hubris. I don't need this. I just anything written before 1998 is all racist or something. And then it's only an interpretation. We don't know the truth, so there's no point in even looking there, which is defeatist at best. In my mind. So I don't have much respect for these people. I'm sorry if you are. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I've just never argued with somebody who's made that claim, so I've never heard the good argument for it.
The other is that it doesn't matter. You can now this I actually have some knowing history. I find this to be an interesting one because imagine you're a peasant working your land all your life, just like your parents did, and you don't really need history because all you want to do is farm your little plot of land and have your kids and tend your pigs.
How do you know how to rotate crops and plant them, and you know what I mean? All the things you do actively as a farmer, you learn it from history, do you not?
Yeah. So this is you get oral traditions, which is different. Well, an oral tradition is just literally history it's one medium of history, which people think it's all mystical because indigenous people did it, but it's just
it's another type. That's all.
Yeah, it's a medium. That's all, and it's one way of passing information down, and we use it all the time. And anyone who says our society doesn't have an oral tradition,
please and thank yous, wash your hands.
They've never been read a bedtime story. They've never tell me a story, Dad. Okay, this one's
to learn things like
Jack and the Beanstalk,
how to tie shoes.
Yeah, and do it like this. So these are it's part of all our culture, but it's a part, and you get people like Thoreau in Walden, where he argues against the need for education and reading because you don't need it. Live simply, and that means you don't need education. And as much as I like that book, that's my Thoreau. I was almost going to call you a master, but even Aurelius says that because we're going to die, it doesn't matter. So we don't. Education is folly. And I'm sorry they're using snow blowers out there instead of a shovel because Edmonton seems to... Anyway, so if you hear any of that, I'm sorry. So this goes to what I kind of wanted to get to with this whole thing before we get to the end. That is really annoying. Why do you need it's like a engine on your back with a blower? It's just shovel it every time it snows. So I'm complaining.
That's all right. It's minus 33 here and it freezes my brain. I can hardly.
So the thing about history is that it is all revolving around one concept, and that's the concept of memory. Whether it be external memory like an archive or a book, or internal memory like stories that we pass down in oral history, or let me draw you a picture of what it kind of looked like. Active living memory or archaeological memory. What these forms of memory are. Well, the memory is at the base of everything that history is. I'm sorry, that is really quite...
That's sort of the thing that history is, though, right?
Yeah. Jeez, what a waste of a job. I'm sorry. Edmonton is one of the loudest cities I've been in. Everyone seems to need to have their engine go extra, and I just hate it. I'm sorry if you're watching and you're in Edmonton, but maybe you need this more than most.
My neighborhood's bad in the summer for lawnmowers.
Oh yeah,
we've got a new one. They've all got those old 1960s ones that are 4 strokes and
Okay, sorry. I just lost my train of thought. So, I know it might sound obvious. It's like history is memory, but I don't know, let's dig into what memory is very quickly. So, at its basic, I'm not going to get into the biology of it or how like thoughts are created, but we use memory to make decisions and to, what happened there, how does that have an impact? But at the same time, it's the most ubiquitous form of information that we have. So if there's a person, then we have someone remembering something. And if they learn something, then they remember more. If they memorize something, then they are a living repository. I have all this here. These books here are my external memory. I know what's in them because I've read them, and I know how to get at them, but I don't need to memorize every book because I have a hard copy. So I keep my memory external. So I don't need to remember it word for word. But I know that, if I pick up that book, I can switch my gears in my memory and start like explaining and quoting, blah, 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 blah. So this goes, when you have more people, you can store more memory, but it's almost more personal than that. So I'm going to go forward unless you have anything you want to say about memory itself.
Well, just to get back to that quote, if you don't mind, the Thoreau one on Walden.
Yeah, I didn't quote him directly.
What's that?
I didn't quote him directly, but kind of referencing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that a lot of the time when we do quote people, it's sort of like in keeping with the whole memory thing that we were talking about. It's kind of like a bookmark or a trigger for a grander scheme of ideas.
Right.
I think quotations are a good example of retaining our history. Sorry, I'm having trouble speaking.
Well, it's not a truism doesn't really do you much help, but when it points to a larger truth. Mm-hmm. So if I say Ilia acta est, everyone's like, okay, what? But anyone who knows it will be like, oh, it's Caesar. That time he was like at the Battle of Zala, and he, defeated the king of Pontus, and this and this and this happened. And if you know the story, all I have to say is this one thing, and and our minds do work kind of hypertextually like that. I'll go back to episode 1 we do talk about that. So we do end up thinking in these ways, and so quotes do serve that purpose, unless you go, that's nice, I like that, and then move on. So a
lot of our history is almost kind of like that, eh? In the sense that a lot of it is a quick trigger, and then there's layers to the depth that you can kind of keep looking for, but you need it to be there. Like somebody has to record all those details for there to be a deeper layer to look into, right? Interpretation or that deeper truth.
That's why we need historians in itself, and that's a great point, because and you hit on something there, is because if there's no one recording it, then how we know what happened? And then you end up having politicized histories and approved histories, and like the CCP approved history when they're going around the Europe saying you're not allowed to talk about the Mongolians like this, and they're changing like museum exhibits because of it. It's like, no, that's not history. History is not the approved. It's the amalgamation of all these watchers. Now, history also doesn't exist in the past. Like I've been saying this awesome, but it's part of what people think in the time. So if you're recording what's happening now, it's everything that happened before now. Everything, even up to like a couple minutes ago. and a bit into the future because of the expectations we hold towards the future. And like if I drop this pen in the future, it would hit the floor. So that's part of the history of the pen. It's going to hit the desk.
Even though the history is recorded with a bias, as long as we try and capture the bias as well, you're still providing knowledge, right?
Right.
Like it's useful even though it's biased, as long as we maintain and don't scrub clean all the details of the watchers or of the recorders.
Right. So if we don't purge Nazi documents because they were, Nazi, we can't know it. The knowledge needs to be destroyed for the safety of others. Like that person is dangerous. We need the Nazi perspective. You can't you can't know. I remember I was on a battlefield tour of in Ortona, and it'd be like, oh man, I was saying something like, I hope we get to see some of the German perspective. And someone's like, why? They were the enemy. It's like, well, what did they think of the unit that we're coming here to follow around in history? It's like, oh yeah, what did they think of the battle they were fighting against us? What did they think of what were their circumstances that led them to do what they did in opposition to us that forced us to react in a certain way? So you need the good and the bad. You need to save everything. And that's so when you get one person, when you get 40 people all writing a history of the same time, that's great. But if they're all looking at it from the same perspective, that's terrible. You need a bunch of different, you need a voice. And this is where the diversity comes in. So if you read, 5 different books from 5 different authors, then you get a more complete picture. And even if it's still kind of biased and you have your own present, all these biases the postmodern kids warn us about without knowing what the heck they're talking about because they held a Foucault book once. It's like, yes, we can get a better thing and see how it happened. Maybe get a better idea of how it happened. And it doesn't need to unveil some truth. I remember I wrote a history once on Richard Parker and the Spithead and Nore mutinies.
Who's that?
Oh, it's go look it up. It's fun, but it's really a small part of history. But I was interested in it.
What's his name?
Richard Parker. He was a seaman who essentially they were during the Napoleonic Wars. They were on a boat and they were just getting sick and fed up with all their stuff. And he essentially led a mutiny, an unsuccessful mutiny of all the sailors at the, on this boat. And I told the history, and I told the history of how it happened and why, and the unsuccessful battle that they had. And then the what do you call it? The trial that he had after, and the aftermath. And everyone asked me, well, what's the point? I was like, well, I told you what happened. Well, you didn't problematize anything. You didn't say oh, this and that, or you didn't. It's like, no, I'm giving another perspective. That's the point. That's the whole point, is that I'm telling you what happened based on what I saw in the primary and secondary sources. That's it. That's all I was trying to do. And everyone was trying to make a big point of how this has realities, or how it shows toxic masculinity, or how it shows that the British are actually a terrible people and should be shunned for their attempts at empire. It's like, whatever. All that is bunk.
Yeah.
So, to me, the effect of finding out exactly what happened was part of it in itself. And it's comes down to, for me, the idea of memory. So if no one remembered that Richard Parker had that mutinied in 1797, I wrote it a couple of years ago, and that it sparked, and that's one of the things that sparked the reform of the British Navy, and had implications for long-reaching implications. If no one remembered who this person was, then you can ask the question, well, did it matter? Well, of course it matters. A tree falls in the forest. But the thing is that it doesn't matter if we know or not. It did happen. But as a sentient individual with my memory, I remember people and I remember what they did. And as a historian, I try and remember and push forward the memory of these things and these people that happen. And to me, that's part of it, is this this keeping that memory alive of as many as possible, because a person likes to know that they will be remembered. And this is part of having a healthy individual. So part of doing history, to me at least, is out of a duty of respect, because I see that there's immense value in maintaining this. So I wrote here that memory is not essential, but it's almost more important than error. So we need that. We live in a continuum of people, and when we die, there's nothing there. And the only thing that will be left is the memory that others have of us. And if we're codified into something, at least some part of us will remain. And that is very comforting for a lot of people. And I don't really like that word, because it's like, oh, it makes me feel better. But it's more than just comfort. It gives your actions meaning. If you know that someone will remember it, if you know that it'll be passed forward into in the effect that you know that what you did was worth doing. So
it's more fulfilling, I guess, eh?
Yeah. So a cynic might say something like, well, then all that's solid is melts into air, which is a Marx quote. And they're right. All that is solid does melt into thin air. You become nothing lasts, nothing things. But we have this idea that that we use memory as this, it's just, I'm thinking of stuff. But how we use it, we can use it intentionally. And history is part of that. We're using memory intentionally to remember these stories in the past, because for some reason we find that they're important to us. And it isn't evident because it doesn't, it doesn't fill your belly up. It doesn't give you more money. It doesn't do this and that. It has secondary effects, which are very, which provide that meaning to all the things we do. So if you say something like, oh, it's all going to fall apart anyway, or nothing matters because all the gods are dead, or all this and that. Well, the thing is that you're still remembering that guy who said that, God is tot. Like you are still remembering this guy, and he's had an influence in your life. So to Nietzsche's, if we look at someone like Nietzsche's perspective, that gives what his life did meaning. It gives it purpose. It gives it that longevity that, you as an individual don't seem to think that you can acquire or have. So it allows us to provide that meaning. So you have this thing, so someone will remember, or will have, or you work in a factory and you build, I remember building windows and hoping that the person, we all kind of, every once in a while we talk about how, I wonder if who's going to use this window, or I wonder this and that. I wonder if, you always wonder if they will, you're making a window that someone's going to appreciate, and they're going to be like, oh, this is a damn good window. I like this. And something like that. You want your thing so that forward in time, when this thing that you've done provides some good. And it's as simple sometimes as just remembering. And we do this every year on Remembrance Day, which is kind of a religion for my wife, because of she serves. So it's not a duty. It's a kind of beyond that. It's something you need to do because
an obligation.
Right. So it's an obligation that she feels she needs to do, and I come and I do the ritual because it's a enforced remembering of that, and it's not it's not free. It's a responsibility. So you go, you put your poppy down at the cenotaph, you sit there or you stand there for a couple seconds and you think about it, and it's this act of remembering that forces you into that headspace of remembrance. And that is almost a trade-off. I'm remembering you. And because I'm remembering you, I hope that someone in the same situation would remember me. Now, war is horrific, but we all want that. We all want to know that, I'm just a car mechanic. No one's going to remember me. It's like, that's not true. Just because you didn't die in a war or you did some, tinkering job, it doesn't mean that you don't want to be remembered. Maybe he was a great mechanic. Glad he started this, and that gives what we do meaning, even for the smallest tasks. And
it sounds like what you're saying and what you're getting at is it's intrinsically human.
Yes,
like it's fundamental to our being and nature as a species, and as contemplative adults. We have to have that type of significance attached to things.
Right. So before we relied a lot on, and I'm not, okay, this is going to be a weird argument. Before we relied, like I said, on the gods or some metaphysical, we will pass forward metaphysically into a realm where we can look down and see what's going on and be like, oh, look, they're remembering me. Oh, look, my funeral's so nice. That, or, it's like this, you go to like Norse religion and it's like the battle you die in is only the first battle. And then we will die and then we will fight in the last battle together, leaving Valhalla to fight, Loki and the gods of space or whatever. I don't have it in front of me, but so, there's this natural inclination that we have. You go back to the Neolithic and Paleolithic, you find like graves and you find, burial patterns and stuff like that. And there's this natural, and this is almost a pushing the dead into the future, so that they have some, they maintained their essence and their being is maintained somehow into the future. And before, you put beads and you put some of their weapons around them and their hunting implements, and
you face them to the west or something like
right.
that.
And this is something that carries them forward, and hopefully they in death they return to the spirit of everything, or you become one with the universe, or you go to heaven, or you I can't think of any of the other ones. So my brain so we have this,
it's like that filial piety, whatever, the family in like Confucianism.
Yeah,
they have filial piety. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Filial piety, you're getting it right. And yeah, because that was very
it was very much along the same lines, though, right? Remember
your ancestors, and a lot of ancient societies had ancestor worship. China, Rome did, Japan did. A lot of people discount the Roman one as well because they had the death masks of their ancestors in their foyers with their like names underneath them with a candle behind them, and that was like a holy shrine. Like these are the patriarchs of this family household. Behold their deeds.
Sorry.
So, yeah, go on. Sorry.
How would you find that ritual fits in with that in the historical sense?
Well, ritual is, I don't know, I should have had a definition of this in my head, but ritual.
Well, it's like a memory aid, I'm guessing, but like right. What I'm getting at is the practice of doing something like putting the poppy on the grave and taking that 3 seconds, like the ritual itself serves to enhance the historical significance too, right?
Yeah, and the ritual makes it gives that important thing a sense of how do I put this? It's almost a heuristic that we use in order to maintain that type of memory. So, and rituals do this. So I got married, the whole marriage ritual, and everyone's like, oh, the marriage ritual doesn't matter. All you have to, it's either you're married or you're not married, which is, after getting married, that marriage ritual was very important. I was surprised at how important it was. It brought my families together. It did a lot of things subtly that I didn't really notice. Brought the families together. It got everyone to know each other. It provided them a space of joy to remember and go forward into. So it's not like, oh, then they're married and everyone hates each other. No.
And you get to look better than you've ever looked in your life.
Right. This is a step forward. This is a turning point. So you walk up and you walk back. So it's symbolic, but the symbolism is rooted in reality. So we do rituals for a reason. And at the risk of sounding structuralist, it had a lot of things that it did that I hadn't noticed until it was happening.
That's probably why it's persisted through all these generations too. Like, I'm sure we're not the first to think as kids that marriage is silly, and then finally realize as adults how it brings, like you said, the families together, and it provides memories. And
yeah, and you start from and it kind of like, if everything goes well and smoothly, then that's generally a good sign, because it means that the husband and the wife can work together long enough to not, beat each other up, to form union. And if they can work together on a wedding, then they can probably work pretty well together on a baby or a family business or whatever. And because they're going to need to work together a long time. So this is like a practice. And so for something like Remembrance Day, we go up and we practice remembering, which actually brings us to a place of remembrance. So we sit there, we're going to have a 1 minute silence where we think about this, and we pretend to think, and then in so doing, we actively think. So everyone, so it's kind of a trick we learned accidentally.
And then for the rest of the year, every time you think of Remembrance Day, you're remembering a time where you sat still and did the remembrance. Like, you're remembering the ritual from all the times that you've done it, kind of.
Right. And so, wait, what if I did that ritual with, some of my other studying? You sit down and you think, and you're like, whoa, I thought of something cool. Whoa, I did that. So you think about it. So history itself, I'm not saying history is a replacement for tradition, but I'm saying we should be putting more focus on it, because I would want to be remembered, and I would want as many people to be remembered as possible. And I think that would, because everyone's saying, oh, what do we do now that Nietzsche killed God and all this stuff? We have, secular, which is such a dumb thing to say, but secular life means that there's no rules and there's no gods enforcing them upon us. It's like, yeah, but you still have to live with everyone else in society. So,
every time a parliamentary procedure happens, it's all ritual.
Right, because they need to play nice. And if they don't play nice, then the rest of society is going to be like, oh, man.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is that, like, our people, you need gods to tell you what to do. You're like, I'm so high and mighty that I can't, let other people tell me what to do. I'm free. It's like, it's not what freedom is, but like, everyone's assuming that they need a god to tell them what to do. It's like, no, even if there is a god, he's probably looking down on us going like, dude, I gave you everything you needed to know. I'm going off to do other stuff. Yeah. So whether or not there's a god doesn't really matter, and whether or not there's an afterlife doesn't really matter. Because what we do here does matter. You can create suffering with your actions. You can try to alleviate suffering with your actions. And that doesn't always mean working at a soup kitchen. That doesn't mean donating to charity, which is a cop-out. Use your hands.
No, if you're a janitor at a school, it means cleaning the floor.
Right. Doing your job, but I'm not saying like do your job and do it happily. It's like, well, if you're not Like, I remember being a janitor. I was like, oh man, this sucks. I need to get an education. But if you're a janitor and like, you know what, this is an okay job. I like it. Like I get to talk to people, you know, no one really bugs me. There's some dirty aspects to it, but there's bad aspects to every job. So
yeah, it's just a personal preference thing.
Right. So, and then, you know, the guy gets into a car accident and all the students are like, oh man, that janitor, it sucks that he died, because he actually was a pretty cool guy. And for a time, people will remember him for what he did. And, you know, even though it was just cleaning the floor and, you know, but he was remembered also for probably being a good guy. And that also acts as a kind of a deterrent. So you think of history as, you know, memory, and it's like, wow, Jordan was such a jerk. Because, and this is kind of where I come at from, this is on a personal level. This is kind of where I come into this is, in the end, the only thing that someone can say about me is whether or not I was good. And this doesn't mean like kind or nice. It's like, was I a good person? And
not how well you did, but how good you did.
Well, even that, did I do good? Was I, like, if I was malevolent, or if I was cheating, or if
that's
I
what
was,
I mean, the difference between good and well. Well,
yeah,
would be how well you performed, like how
yes,
articulate or how intricate your fingers are if you have a finesse job. But like good is intent and heart and spirit and effort and
right,
all that kind of stuff.
So this comes from my youth when I remember watching this show, and I've mentioned it before. I might do a like personal stream of it and be like, you guys need to watch this. There's this one scene in this show from the 90s called Babylon 5. I've mentioned it before, where these historians are sitting around talking about the hero of the show 100 years after he's dead. And they're saying like, oh, he couldn't have possibly done all those things. It's ludicrous to assume that he didn't have help, and they're just being cynical about it. And they're saying, well, you know, I think it's just a cult of personality around this guy. And like, you've seen this guy do his thing and how kind of guy he is, going through all these trials. And his wife comes in. She's just this ancient woman. And she just goes and she looks him in the eye and she goes, he was a good man, and then leaves. And it's very powerful. And they're like, whoa, you're actually her. You can tell us all this stuff. And she says, well, you speak only to hear yourself speak. You're not listening. You don't want to listen. You only talk to talk. You say nothing. And that was very powerful to me, because I can build a bridge, but the bridge will crumble, or they might replace it. I can start a family, but my great grandchildren might forget me. And they'll forget all my little deeds. But what matters seems to be, to me at least, falls along that lines. Was I a good man? Was I a bad man? And that's about all it can be left over after that. And then from there, you can increase the complexity. Well, he was a good man because he did this and that, but the thing that'll last will be, were you good or not? And to me, that drives a lot of my actions. It doesn't mean I'm going to be nice all the time. In fact, far from it. I'm not going to let people take advantage of me. I'm looking at you, previous landlord. So
and countless employers.
Yeah, well, some of my employers were.
Not all of them. I said countless.
I know. Well, I had a lot of jobs, but yeah. A lot of my early employers were spot on correct about my youthful uselessness. But I had a lot to learn in my teens and early 20s. So the thing is that when we think about it like that, we start thinking about how can I make a difference? We've already started that as a society. How can you make a difference kind of stuff? But it's cliche, especially when it comes from TV advertisement, some corporation. What are you going to do with your blah, blah, blah? It's just like disregarded. but we can ask ourselves these questions. And so we can think about how we can exist as a piece of history in ourself. So you are leaving a memory, a record of memory with it, which is the memory that, so when you die, you leave those like objects and papers and information that is left over. And as time goes on, it gets scattered. The context gets removed because, this thing goes over here, this thing goes over here, this thing goes over here. Your apartment or house gets sold to somebody else. People move away, and you want to know that you left some sort of record, some trace. And why
Can you explain that though? Like, what is that drive? I mean, we keep going back to how people want to be remembered, and what is that? Is that like just part of our nature that makes us more proficient as a species? Like, does it make us more evolutionarily adapted to the world to have that type of predisposition for remembrance? Or
maybe I think part of it is that because we live in a reality where time exists in linear fashion. If you don't like that, leave it in the comments. We'll have a conversation. But it does exist in a linear format. Even whether or not time is an illusion doesn't seem to really matter at this point, and it didn't matter for our evolution because we existed and we evolved along lines that made us exist more effectively in a universe that, or at least in a place where time was seemingly consistent, moving forward at a consistent pace. And because we live in that, and we the goal of the organisms that we were was to pass on its genetic data as effectively as possible. And I think a lot of that can be evolutionarily explained, but it doesn't really explain everything, because we evolved with a memory, because you want to see, okay, the deer I'm hunting was right there, and I remember it being there. I'm gonna have to remember its spot, so it sat down there. So because it sat down there, I have to remember it sat down there. It might go there, it might go there, and so I'm gonna go around here. And by the time you go around to the other side of the tree to stalk this deer that you're hunting, and you forget where it was, well, you're a bad hunter. So you need a certain amount of memory. Now, we also used to pass on that stuff. So you have evidence of oral traditions where you get learning through stories, campfire stories, and all that stuff, passing on your traditions through a narrative, sometimes an epic narrative using the technologies of rhyme and song, where you get stuff like the stories of the Iliad and all these ancient stories, which seem to have been passed on completely orally. And it's strange how easily you can learn a tune better than you can learn, a prose narrative, which is one of the ways. But the goal,
my affinity for hip hop.
Yeah, which is actually, I wish hip hop would take it more seriously as an art form, because it's actually quite clever when it does. So it is based on the fact that we exist in one point in history at a time. And we all exist in the same point in history at the same time, as far as we can tell. So in order to move that information forward, we have to, we create these traditions, we create this and that. And we try to explain it through, gods and this and that, and maybe they're controlling history. Maybe it doesn't matter. If the gods are controlling history, then our fate's already determined. Well, fate and history kind of, they're on the same page, but if you're going to look at one, you kind of can't really pay too much attention to the other because, well, if there's fate, then why am I even trying to teach you history? Well, even if there's fate, you still have to do the math. And so that's kind of where I sit.
Can I ask you one other question then? And forgive me if we go a little bit off track with this, but you've really piqued my interest. We've sort of outlined and defined how historical context and references help us moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also covered how individual people want to be remembered as being good, generally speaking.
Well, good or capable or whatever they value.
Yeah, like a positive sentiment from their passing. People want to be remembered, right?
Yeah, or like, I was the most terrible conqueror on the planet. Yeah.
So I guess I sort of just want to ask you quickly if there are groups and colonies and, you know, there are societies of people throughout all the ages who have subscribed to some form or another of theism, mm-hmm. like religion or whatever. And I think those two are tied, but it's hard for me to really figure out how history has a productive means moving forward in evolutionary terms, like it's beneficial to us as a species.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts or ideas on how a personal remembrance might be productively useful to future generations? Like, does it change people's feeling of themselves having come from somewhere special? Like the inherited good? Like, we don't like inherited sin, but people seem to like inherited.
Oh yeah, the sins of the father is as stupid. Legally, sins of the father is atrocious, and I hate that we bring it up.
But it's quite similar to feel like you want to feel good about, or you want people to feel good about you passing. So it's very similar, but
yeah, my obvious thought would be to go to the idea of reincarnation, where you get a lot of people who, you know, it's like, oh, you used to be this, or used to be in the court of that guy, and used to be this, where in reality, most of us were peasants in the past. Even if we aren't reincarnated, our ancestors were probably both kings and peasants and slaves. We're all descended from, you know, we're descended from those who were able to procreate, and not from like the god kings, you know, unless you're, well, a third of humanity is descended from Genghis Khan, which is interesting. But yeah. So
there's an English one too, where there was a king with a fat lip, and that's how all like white people with the bottom lip that sticks out. That's where they got that from.
Oh, like probably in Spain.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know that one, but it's an interesting story.
But anyway, sir, what I was sort of asking though is, do you think there's like some evolutionary benefit to having this need for being remembered as a good person? Do you think it helps us as people? Like, I
think it's a force that we don't really pay much attention to, because we have funerals where we all sit around and we talk about, you know, the person, and we get together as a group and we have this, and I think that signifies a lot of that. So we get around and we remember them like one last time, and we push them off into the black or whatever. And we sit around and we talk about them and we say this and that. And generally, if we are remembered well, more people will be at our funeral. And it's easy to just be like, well, I don't care about that, blah, 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 blah. But for a lot of people, that's like, what do people will think about you after you're gone is generally something that hits really hard. You know, it's something as simple as like, you're dead. They're going to see your internet history. Oh no. But it's also, we think of ourselves almost irrationally as like, you know, if I do this, someone's going to yell at me, and I don't want that. But then if you think, oh, but then everyone will think of me as a evil for time and time again. And generally, I think that's probably a really healthy thing. It's usually probably a bad sign or a good sign that you need a psychologist when you say, well, if I did this, everyone would remember me, even if it was badly. I was the one who killed that guy or started World War I or shot JFK or whatever.
Yeah.
Like Gavrilo Princip was just a kid, a really angry kid. And because of the guy he shot, we all know his name. History will not forget him. And the same with like Lee Harvey Oswald or what's his name, John Wilkes Booth. Like, people aren't going to forget these guys for the evil they did. And that is also a temptation. It's like the easy way. It's like cheating your way into history. Or you get someone like Guy Fawkes who thought he was doing good, and now they burn him in effigy every year. So you don't really also
he's remembered as part of the anonymous movement now.
Yeah, he started
irony, man. It's so delicious.
Started the first hacker group. But it is. We can't really. The other thing is we can't control what history does with us either. You look right now where a lot of people are claiming that all these people who did a lot of hard work in history are now their work is null and void because they are racist or something. It's like Sir John A. Macdonald was a alcoholic. It's like everyone was. You've seen pictures of those parties, but like, and yeah, he was a very pragmatic politician. But I don't think he did start something that has caused a lot of people a lot more happiness than had Canada not been here. Fight me. But and I don't think we should be taking down or scouring statues because of that. And that's
actually the next question I was going to ask you. Is with that in mind, is how do you feel about Confederate monuments and public grounds?
Yeah, that one was almost an easy question for me because I
got to give you a softball every once in a while.
Yeah, I thought about that one because Confederate monuments, like, it was the Confederacy. Like, your system of economics was terrible. You didn't have any infrastructure, and none of your workers were, there was a lot wrong with it. And I'm like, to not even brush against slavery, there's stuff wrong with it. Now, that doesn't mean that a bunch of people who formed their own nation in 1860 should be forgotten. But that doesn't mean we should be heroizing that. And I realize that a lot of those statues were put up cheaply in response to the civil rights movement. But that also doesn't mean we should get rid of them, because we can't forget that either. Yeah, take them down because they're not exactly legit, but put them up in a museum.
Yeah, like, why don't we move them?
So, like, no.
Why is it so black and white? Like, take them down and burn them, or do nothing and leave them in a school?
Well, I think this goes to the postmodern linguistical turn, where if you speak, it's kind of almost a magical thing. If you speak evil, then it creates the evil. So if I use like, it's the whole thing with pronouns, where if you use improper pronouns, you're reinforcing something.
No, it's violence.
Yeah, it's violence, but it's like a magic spell. And it's like you're using language and it's reinforcing a system of oppression. It's like, no, it's not. It's a word. And
it's communication. That's what it is.
So, well, if we communicated differently, then we could have a better society. It's like, no, if we stopped hitting people that we didn't like, we'd have a better society. Like, it's that simple. Well, it's not that simple. It's kind of like Bentham.
It could be. That would be better, even
if we gave everybody money, they wouldn't be poor. It's like, oh, Bentham, you're the best. So, actually, it was happiness. If we just gave everyone food and shelter and thing, then they would be happy. It's like, no, it ended up being very much more complicated than that. But it's a good thought. Got us started on a few things. But that's the thing. You have these. I guess that also gets back to Lippmann and his public opinion, where, all of a sudden, this guy, you're looking for something to hate, and you find the statue. It's like, I hate this because why don't I have a statue? And there's a lot of resentment there. And you have these, I guess I keep saying these, like, chaotic agents of chaos, like moving around, trying to shake the nest. And this is also part of the, let the past die, because it's this evil thing and you want to destroy it so that you can have your own story present. And I feel like this is part of the same thread. You want to destroy the past so or the people that you think are important are more representative. Well, what you can do is just write a history instead of destroying that which...
Or an essay or something.
Yeah. Why would you even write about America? America's so racist. Just like, dude, people live there. So, like, well, if they're suffering, people are dying every day. It's like, what? Are they really? Yeah, they are. But, like, I think you're projecting. So that comes back to history not as merely a force of remembrance, but it's also as a vehicle of truth. If it's fantasy, it's not history. Now you can write fantasy as history, like Tolkien or C.S. Lewis or something like that, where you write. George R.R. Martin's good at this too, where you write a history of another place, and often these stories tend to resonate a lot more with us. And Tolkien essentially said, it's because I'm writing history. I'm just writing history in a fantasy world, and that's why it resonates, because this is how things progress. It's not a straight hero's journey. It's the acts are embedded within other acts, with other actors acting in a continuum of action, and that gives the story a reality, even if it's in this place that didn't exist with creatures that didn't exist, that allow us to see people acting in a way that allows them, they're acting in history. They're not just acting with recourse to the story. So you get a story of something like, there's a big bad and you got to go defeat it, and you got to get your group together to go defeat it. Oh yeah, we defeated it, and now everyone lived happily ever after. But happily ever after is still history. Happily ever after is history still going forward. And what happened before that is also important, which is why people just keep going, because the further you dig into it, there's mysteries and there's a history, and go read the Silmarillion, and everyone's acting for a reason, and they have their things, which is why people read these stories. But beyond that, so we have these stories that people tell each other that exist in the continuum of history, in the actions that people have taken. Oh yes, sorry, it was truth. That. So history isn't just the stories we tell; it's the truth, and whether or not you believe in truth doesn't really matter, because the act of trying to tell something that it's as true as possible is part, I believe, in what makes good history and what makes it
real.
It's what makes it real. It's what makes it more meaningful. That's a good way of putting it. Because, if you just tell a hagiography of, say, a pope or something, or some guy or whatever, then you're just telling a story. But if you're telling, a tale of a pope, warts and all, or, if you talk about your grandfather, he was this kind of guy. He's kind of rough though. Like he would challenge you on stuff. And he was a hard man to be around, but you know what? I don't think he was, I think he meant well. And like you warts and all, like, oh man, he drank too much, but it was my grandfather. So, or you can't just look at it politically, what do I want to say? What do I need to say to have the message? Because we need to alleviate suffering and oppression, blah, 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 blah. Fuck you. Because, if we are honest with ourselves, with our place in history, and about those people that we're talking about in history, yes, your heroes aren't what you expect. Whoa, deep. Yeah. Okay, whatever, obviously. But there's a reason we still tell heroic stories. Now, history tells us something a little more, and that truth is the thing that sets it apart. You can learn more and you can learn a better lesson from a story of truth rather than from a story of, what you need or think people should be hearing in all your hubris. This is why a lot of times when you look at the old Greek myths, they're trying to express a lot of this. So you get stories of Perseus and Theseus, and they are not paragons of virtue. They screw up. They end up, I think it was Theseus particularly that ended up becoming a tyrant. And the stories aren't just like, and then Theseus did another great thing and another great thing, and then he started cheating on his wife, and then he started being a tyrant to his citizens, and then people started to want to kill him. It's like, oh wait, this is a great story now, because the hero gets old, and it's they're trying to tell some truth, but it's not a true story. It represents truth, but history itself is supposed to try to represent as close as possible truth. And even though you can't get to the perfect truth, then it's the attempt that makes it more of a useful story.
So it's like the pursuit of truth, the action or the process of chasing something that's impossible to catch.
Right. And it needs to be constant. It's a
and
Red
I think
Queen
those things should
scenario.
be separated too. Like truth with a capital T being like immutable laws of physics truth.
Yeah.
And truth with a T, not to say that they're equivalent, but they're translations of each other. They're versions of each other.
So those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. That's a truth. Now, whether or not it's true, you can twist that around to make it true or false in any situation. Well, look, now there's no more, this guy died, so now he can't be president again. It's like,
it can't physically
be. So, but like we do need it is important to have stuff as boring as like a proper reckoning of which emperor came after each emperor and how they, did what, and as best as we can know. But it's, and then
like the awareness of it too, just knowing that there are people of a certain way, like knowing that there are psychopaths, even if there's only 1 in 1,000, knowing that they exist means you don't trust everybody blindly. Like it's a useful thing to know that things happen sometimes.
Yeah. And like, oh, that's interesting. And like you a lot of times a historian will be like, oh, it's like that one time, because they've seen that stuff in history. You see back.
And that's what we mean by experience. Like when we pay people for their work experience, what we're getting at is all those little situations that you get from time and exposure, not based on how great your education was or how great your memory was. It's experience of time itself.
And like I see trends in our society that happened before in history too, like
bell bottoms.
Yes, terrible. No, the gators are coming back. You're gonna see a lot of blouse pants. No, the trends, because we are human. So you get stuff like people have talked about gender stuff before in history. This isn't something we're just discovering. This is, we've talked about gender and stuff all throughout human history. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? What happens when women are in charge? What happens when men are in charge? People have talked about this all the time. Like I said I think it was the last episode we did, between the optimates and the populares in Rome, where this is essentially populism versus aristocracy, which came up again in the 18th century, in the late 18th century, where you get, the people who want their, inalienable rights, and then the aristocracy who's like, we just have always been in charge. We're chosen by God to be in charge. And even nowadays you get labor movements versus those who control the means of production or whatever. And it's the same story over and over again, because these are things that humans do. And especially if you go back to some of the debates around the French Revolution, they sound very similar to a lot of the extremist rhetoric on both sides that we're hearing even today. And the reasoning and the way people are arguing. And to look at that, you say, okay, I don't want to fall into these traps. Now, not everyone needs to be a historian. So the point of this whole conversation is that you know why it's important for there to be historians and for there to be memory institutions and for us to remember things. And sometimes it's just good to know that, oh, you know what? There's historians out there. It's good someone's remembering it. Oh, I'll still be in the archive when I'm dead. I'll be in there. My story will be in there because, I've got all my archives together and they're going to be taking and preserving it, and I'll be in there if anyone wants to look at my stuff. And that's comforting. Somebody, an archivist or a researcher or historian or even someone who's curious is going to come across part of your story, which is, it feels good. You can move on and know that that's something that someone else is taking care of, maybe.
As a publisher myself, I can sort of concur with that sentiment. That's very much a big part of it, is just to leave a permanent record to show that you were there.
Yeah. So I did want to get into I think I've made, so history kind of exists in the future, in that we have the knowledge and we don't have to get it again. We're going to pass this knowledge on to the future, but we're also going to pass on our stories. It exists in the present, that it gives insight into our lives. It makes us better and wiser. And we can learn almost the easy way, or we can consult it as we would consult an elder. But these elders don't need to be alive because they left us a lot of their wisdom. And so, it's like, you get people talking about shamans and elders and all this stuff that when they're this ancient knowledge revival, but we have this ancient knowledge. Historians and archivists and people who've seen the value in memory have been keeping it, and we have it. Go read it. It's like,
and everyone who rejects history uses history. They all speak, and language was developed historically.
Yeah.
Contextually relevant to a person's actual time that they're living. English sounded totally different 400 years ago.
Yeah, Shakespeare. I don't know how you did it, but
yeah,
you darn well did it. And this also exists in the past, obviously, because that's what we're trying to remember. And the past is everywhere before now, including part of now, and now, and now. And part of that is to honor those of the past, so that we in turn may be remembered ourselves. We remember those in the past in the hope that, kind of a give and take. I'll remember you. I hope someone will remember me because this is what I would want. This is some golden rule stuff here. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And this is why we do Remembrance Day. This is why we have these rituals, because you want them to do this for you. So you do it to them. And this is not selfish, because those that you're remembering are worth remembering. And
it's also sort of like an example for them to know their own duty and responsibility moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Having Remembrance Day sort of tells us, look, it's incumbent upon us as young, fit males to go to war if somebody invades our country.
Yeah.
We have to defend it, and
defending
that's the
against
they set.
A defense of an unjust attacker is a just use of violence. But Remembrance Day also reinforces the fact of how horrifying it was, how terrible it was. And the military does this so that we don't spend their lives frivolously. And this remembrance serves a massive, huge purpose, and I cannot stress Remembrance Day enough. It's one of, I think, our most important holidays, or rituals that we do in our modern society. Which actually brings me to another thing I wanted to do. I have an idea for another podcast on the modern religion that's forming, And it's like a couple months away, but I've been thinking about it for a while, and I kind of want to get
scintillating.
It talks about like stuff like that. And I get into Jedi and science fiction, as well as like secular gods and stuff like that. So I'm working on it. It's not birthed yet, but once it comes out, it'll be a good show. Now, I think I'm kind of nearing the end. But there's one more thing I want to talk about that's going to be a little weird, is the kind of the teleological aspect of history. Now, as far as we can tell, nothing survives history. So what's the point of keeping history? Well, the present, obviously, the ones that are for us, the living. As I'm quoting, I think that was Lincoln. Oh boy, that was the Gettysburg Address, wasn't it?
I can look that up if you like.
Thank you. So I should know that, but if you'll allow me to get a bit metaphysical here, the end result of history, what is the ultimate use of this? So I don't know. Let's have a little thought experiment, because my thought is that if we keep as many of our voices and our names and our stories and our knowledge together, and we preserve it, my thought is we preserve it even past when humanity needs it or is there. Send it off, leave it for anything that comes after, or leave it as a cenotaph or a monument to who we were. And the more complete and the better we do, the more, I don't want to say value, but more important that monument to who we were was or will be. Because we can't know what's going to happen, and we don't know if we're going to survive a century, 3 centuries. We don't know what we're going to evolve into in 50,000 years. Going back onto another quote I made earlier, who knows, in 40,000 years there could be only war. But the idea is that we're building this thing that's bigger than us, and we exist as part of a society, and when it ends, what are we going to leave behind? And what'll be left a lot is what our memory institutions have done. And if you want to leave nothing, that's your prerogative. But part of what I see personally the value is of maintaining as much as we can and making sure that there's at least something to remember us by. I don't cast it off into space. Giant repository of knowledge left on what's left of our home world or outside the orbit of our solar system once the sun expands beyond, or send it off after the sun explodes, cast it out in the stream of interdimensional, whoever wants to download it, it's out there, I guess. Who knows?
Sort of the way I look at it, though, is evolution is never with intent. Like, a platypus didn't develop a beak and flippers because it wanted to, you know what I mean? So as long as we keep preserving history as best we can, we will evolve as best as possible, I think. And it's sort of relevant or related to the what you were saying about like the mystics and shamans. Usually those are people with like mental disabilities, but were untreated. Not like full-fledged disabled, but people with dysfunctions, mental dysfunctions, like they hear things or schizophrenic or
right. But sometimes they were the keepers of the memory and the keepers.
Yeah, a lot of them were the shamans because they weren't able to work as well, but they were really good at hearing voices and directing the public's spiritual needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having one schizophrenic out of 1,000 is great for a population because it gives them a mystic. And you don't want everybody like that, but you do want a diversity and a variety in a population.
Right.
And I think history is kind of the same way. Having a bunch of different truths, even if some are truer than others or more accurate or more useful than others, is sort of irrelevant in the grand scheme, because in the grand scheme, you want as many varieties of truths as you can get, as accurately as possible.
Because
to me, that's what history is all about. It's the
some of the truths are the same truth from a different perspective.
Yeah.
From the
and a lot of them you can throw out, but like you keep them anyway, because in 200,000 years, maybe that's the one reference that like makes everything come together. Like you can't predict how useful.
The other thing is that sometimes it's a thing. Well, I guess we go back to poetry. I guess a thing of beauty is a joy forever. So this is I'm quoting without knowing, so I think this is Endymion from Keats. Let me just make sure. And
of beauty is a joy forever. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So you get this idea that, so it's from Keats, the first stanza of Endymion, which is a poem. So a thing of beauty is a joy forever. And sometimes the beauty of a thing is the worth of itself. It doesn't have to have a practical purpose. We grow flowers. Well, why? Because they smell good and they're pretty. Do you need anything more than that? Well, they take carbon out of the atmosphere. No. They're flowers. They're beautiful. That's it. That's all we need.
They're good for your mental health. Like, to measure, but it's true. Like things that smell good and taste good and whatnot are like good for our brains.
And the things that we love, we push forward as culture. These are the things that we do as a society that work, that we love, that we find beautiful. We keep pushing Shakespeare forward because it has meaning, but also because the way he worded them has a beauty intrinsic to itself. And we push forward, like, read this, and you'd be like, that was great. I loved it. What did it mean? And that's part of it. So in the chaos that we have as human culture, if we have a representation of it, it doesn't matter if this religion or that religion was wrong or right. They still created things that are worth remembering. And even if they made a mistake, and even in the ugliness of tyrannical regimes, by keeping that ugliness, we see the beauty of those things that are actually beautiful. And in remembering, it gives us that, and it makes everything worthwhile.
Word.
Even if we have to push it out into the ether in the last generation, then that's what we do. We sent out Voyager and Pioneer because of these. We put, this is where we are. This is who we were. Not because, we think, come and talk with us, because we know that by the time it does get to anybody, we'll be gone. And that's something that will remain of us.
Just for the listeners, the Pioneer and Voyager are the probes that we sent outside of the solar system.
Yeah.
With like a recording or a disc or something like that.
With a bunch of our music. And it didn't just have classical music on it. It had all these representations. It had,
different countries and languages, and
it said hello in like a ton of different cultures and countries, and it was on an LP.
Oh, and math. Yeah.
So, and that itself has a beauty to it. So if, you take, I guess I'm coming back to the practical from the end. If you take money out of these memory institutions, you are robbing your future for a dubious benefit in the present. And I think it's worth every individual thinking about what history means to them. And I would say to a lot of people, try not to be cynical about it, because it's so easy to be like, oh, it doesn't matter. No one's going to remember me. Blah, 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 blah. I'm just a small guy, or history's only big people. And it's like, yes, big people do have a overrepresentative influence on history and how history goes. But we all are also reacting as humans. Because sometimes you're just put in a position where you can make a big decision. And the gravity of seeing people going through that before can help you with the gravity of that. And I think I'm starting to go over stuff I've already talked about. So I will leave it with that. History.
And I'll make one final comment before we close out, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this is just my opinion, obviously, but I think it's worth mentioning because it adds weight to the context of our discussion today. I think the freest people that you could possibly imagine in like a thought experiment would be somebody who's most aware of all of their options and capacities and capabilities.
Right.
The person who's most aware of all those things would be considered the most competent, generally speaking. And the most competent person, being aware and knowledgeable, would also understand the benefits of synergies and cooperation. And so they would be most willing, and the freest person would be most willing to subject their freedoms for a greater set of freedoms, if that makes sense.
It does, because freedom not as in I want to be able to do, but the freedom because...
So freedom isn't about accumulating as much for yourself. It's about wisely distributing your freedom and submitting to others.
Right.
I think history helps us a lot with that because it's the thing that we use to differentiate.
We give assent to our representative governments in the hope that they, like, we give up a certain amount of freedom to allow them to do stuff. So I have the freedom to make decisions in politics, but I also have the freedom to give that responsibility up to someone else. This is not the Greek idea of freedom. This is more of the Roman idea of freedom, the libertas. You are free within the constraints of a society.
Like a student sitting quietly in school, which I never did, but when a student sits quietly in school, the education they earn is worth more than the freedom that they're submitting to in that moment. Right. So and I think history is the thing that tells us what wise freedoms are or what is wise. Well, it's strange that going back to when I got married, I felt a lot freer after I got married than I did before. So it's just like, oh, wow, because, I gained more financial stability from, being married, but that's not why you get married, because you also have that moral and emotional and psychological support of that person who's there, and you just have someone there, which is priceless. In doing that, I increase my freedom by having to share. Sacrificing some of it, you got more of it back. Yeah. So instead of saying this is mine and this is only mine, I'm the only one who's free to use this. It's like such a small freedom. Yeah. But it's very narrow-minded and like weak to think that way. Yeah. So, but yeah, I just wanted to make that note because that's what I appreciate most about history is the wisdom that it provides, the insight or the clarity of vision. Yeah, to make better choices and decisions, and that's what makes your life better. And the other thing beyond that is yes, history can be extremely boring. I'm sorry. Yes, I have a book. I think you gave it to me. It's the German Army, and it's literally just a lists of how the German Army was logistically organized from 1939 to 45. Definitely wasn't me. No, you found it somewhere and then gave it to me. And I was just I looked at it and I was like, oh boy, this is just data and it's arranged. But sometimes you do need to go through the data to get an understanding of how things were. And you, like everything, you need to put the work in. But it's worthwhile. But it's worthwhile because history is not dates and names. Those are what happened. Okay. Then you can say, well, what was the date? Who was Gorbachev and how was he interacting with Yeltsin? Yeah, that's a good one because these people are important. You do need to know these names, but what they did was more important than just their name. Yeah. So don't think that history is just dates and names. You'll learn the dates and names when you learn the history. It's engaging with it. And the more you engage with it, you'll just know the dates and names through engagement. So don't be afraid to pick up a history book and don't be afraid to think about how your own life will be represented after. And I think that's probably a good place to... Thank you so much for the spirited discourse there. I really appreciate the conversation. I love the subject matter, as always. It's something near and dear to both of our hearts. I'll just remind our listeners that we can, I'm Christopher Driver, it's Jordan Roy. You've been listening to Frivolous Gravitas, and we have an RSS feed. If you do podcasts, it's chrisdriver.com/feed/rssfeed.xml. Yes. And we have playlists on our channel. What else? Comment, like, subscribe,
comment,
help, share.
Even if you disagree with us, just...
Especially if you disagree.
Yeah, we were waiting for our first downvote, but that doesn't mean like give us a downvote just because. Make us earn our downvotes. So,
yeah, loathe this shit.
Yeah, but like if you're gonna downvote us, give us a thing. And if you're just contrarian, I'm just gonna be like, eh. So, all right, I'll see you guys next week.